Dad, what are you doing cleaning the floor of my company?
The mop bucket hit the marble floor and the sound cracked through the lobby like a gunshot in a cathedral. Dante Whitfield stopped mid-stride. His Italian loafers, buffed to a mirror shined that morning by a man whose name he never asked, caught the fluorescent light and threw it back against the stone walls of Whitfield Capital headquarters. The air smelled of his $500 cologne, that blend of sandalwood and bourbon oak that a magazine once called the scent of a man who answers to no one. But underneath it, rising from the wet floor like a ghost crawling out of the earth, came the sharp bite of industrial floor cleaner. Pine sol and ammonia. The smell of labor. The smell of someone else's hands, doing the work you refused to do. He almost kept walking. That was the terrifying part he would think about later. In the dark hours when sleep refused to come, he almost kept walking. His eyes were locked on his phone, scrolling through a congratulatory text from his CFO about the Meridian deal, when his peripheral vision caught the hunched figure on one knee, wringing out a mop into a yellow bucket with a cracked wheel. Something stopped him. Not conscience. Not yet. It was the hands. Those hands. Thick-knuckled, scarred across the right palm where a hay baler had bitten down in the summer of 1989. Dark brown skin mapped with veins that stood up like rivers on a topographical chart. Hands that had once gripped his tiny body and held him above a baptism font while the whole congregation sang. Dante's throat closed. The man on the floor wore a gray uniform 2 sizes too big, the kind they give you when they have run out of your size and do not care enough to order one. Clipped to the left breast pocket was a white badge. Dante read the name on the badge, and the letters burned into his retina like a brand pressed into livestock. Elias. Janitorial Services. Elias Whitfield, his father. Down on his knees, wringing a filthy mop in the lobby of an empire that bore their shared name. The phone slipped from Dante's hand. It hit the wet marble, and the screen splintered into a web of cracks. Neither man moved to pick it up. The water from the mop seeped into the edges of the phone case, shorting the screen to black. Elias looked up. Not fast, not startled. He looked up the way a man looks up when he has been waiting for this moment for 7 months and has rehearsed the expression he would wear. Calm, steady. The faintest tremor at the corner of his mouth, which he steadied by pressing his lips together. "Hey, son," Elias said. His voice was quiet. Not broken, not ashamed, just quiet, the way the Georgia pines are quiet after a storm has already torn through and there is nothing left to shake. Dante could not speak. His mouth opened and closed like a man drowning in 3 inches of water. The cologne that had made him feel invincible 5 minutes ago now felt like a costume, like he had been playing dress-up and someone just walked in and found him. Elias stood up slowly. His left knee popped. Loud. The kind of pop that speaks of cartilage worn to powder, of decades spent on concrete and in fields and on the hard side of everything life had to offer. He steadied himself on the mop handle and looked at his son with eyes that held no accusation. That was the worst part. There was no anger in those eyes. Just love. The deep, unreasonable, unearnable kind of love that only a father can carry for a child who forgot him. "Daddy," Dante whispered, and the word came out cracked and jagged, like he was 14 again, standing in the doorway of the kitchen in Valdosta, Georgia, telling his father he wanted to leave. Dante Whitfield had the world at his feet. He had a corner office that looked out over the Atlanta skyline like a throne room surveying a kingdom. He had 3 cars that cost more than his parents' house. He had a wife whose diamond ring caught the light in magazine photographs. He had everything. But in that hallway, standing over a puddle of mop water and a shattered phone, he realized his throne was built on his father's broken back, and the kingdom he ruled was rotten from the inside. If you believe that no man is too big to honor his father, hit that like button. Tell us in the comments, What was the first job you ever had to support your family? And where are you listening from today? Valdosta, Georgia, 1991. The rain did not fall that summer. It attacked. It came down in sheets so thick you could not see your own hand at arm's length, and it turned the red clay of the Whitfield property into a churning slick of mud that sucked at your boots like it wanted to swallow you whole. Elias Whitfield stood in the middle of it, hatless, water streaming down his face and into his collar, his hands wrapped around a fence post that had snapped in the storm. He was 34 years old, and he already moved like a man of 50. His back had a permanent hunch from bending over crops. His right shoulder sat higher than his left from years of carrying feed bags. The skin on the back of his neck was so dark and sun-thickened it looked like the bark of a live oak. And when Martha would rub lotion on it at night, her fingers would catch on the ridges and she would press her lips together and say nothing, because what was there to say? The farm was not really a farm. It was 4 acres of tired soil on the edge of Lowndes County that Elias's grandmother had somehow held on to through the Depression, through Jim Crow, through every attempt the county had made to tax it away, or rezone it, or simply forget it existed. Elias grew collards, sweet potatoes, and field peas. He sold what he could at the roadside stand on Highway 41 and bartered the rest with the women at Mount Olive Baptist Church for whatever his family needed that week. A jar of preserves for a bag of flour, a basket of tomatoes for a pair of shoes that one of the deacon's boys had outgrown. Martha worked inside. Not because she could not handle the field. Lord knows that woman was stronger than half the men in the county, but because she had found a way to turn fabric into money. She took in alterations from the women in town, and at night, long after Elias had fallen asleep with his boots still on and his legs hanging off the edge of the bed, the sound of her sewing machine would fill the house like a heartbeat. That Singer machine, avocado green with a cracked foot pedal, ran from 9 at night until 3 in the morning, every single night, while Martha squinted under a 60-watt bulb and turned hems and took in waists and sometimes, when she thought nobody was listening, hummed hymns that her own mother had hummed in the same kitchen 30 years before. They had one son, Dante. He came into the world on August 14th, 1983 at Greenleaf Hospital, and Elias said later that the boy screamed so loud the nurses in the next ward thought someone had dropped a tray. He was small but fierce, with a grip that locked onto your finger and would not let go. Martha held him against her chest and cried, not from pain, but from the sudden crushing weight of understanding that this small person was now the most important thing in the universe, and that everything she did from this moment forward would be measured against whether it was good enough for him. Elias and Martha did not talk about dreams the way people in movies talk about dreams. They did not sit on the porch and stare at the stars and say, "One day our son will be something." They were too tired for poetry. But there was an understanding between them, unspoken and ironclad, that Dante would not grow up to stand in the rain holding a broken fence post. He would not sell sweet potatoes from a card table on the side of the highway. He would go somewhere. He would become someone. And they would carry him there on their backs if they had to, through the mud, through the debt, through whatever the world put in the way. The first sign that Dante was different came when he was 6. His teacher, Mrs. Delphine Crawford, a woman who had been teaching first grade at Pinevale Elementary for 27 years and had seen every kind of child come through her classroom, called Elias and Martha in for a conference. She sat them down in chairs designed for 6-year-olds, their knees up around their chests, and told them their son had read every book in the classroom library. Not just the picture books, the chapter books, the encyclopedia set that nobody touched. He was reading at a 5th grade level, and he had corrected her, politely but firmly, on the number of rings around Saturn. Martha clutched her purse. Elias stared at the tiny desk and said nothing. Mrs. Crawford leaned forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield," she said, and her voice had that careful tone people use when they know they're about to change someone's life. "Your boy has a gift, but a gift without opportunity is just a burden. He needs more than Pinevale can give him." That night, after Dante was asleep, Elias sat on the back porch and did the math on a piece of paper bag. How much to send Dante to the magnet school in Thomasville, bus fare, books, the uniform they required. He added the numbers 3 times, and each time the total came out higher than anything they had. He crumpled the paper and threw it into the yard. Then he went out in the dark and picked it up, smoothed it flat, and folded it into his wallet. The next morning, Elias drove to Ahira and asked for a job at the chicken processing plant. He would work the farm from 5 in the morning until noon, then drive 40 minutes to the plant and work the line from 1 until 9 at night. He would do this 6 days a week. On Sundays, he would sleep until the church bell rang, and then he would put on his one good suit and sit in the 3rd pew at Mount Olive and sing loud enough to shake the windows, because if God was going to ask this much of him, the least he could do was listen. Martha took on double the alterations. She bought a second-hand ironing board from the Goodwill and set it up next to the sewing machine so she could press garments while waiting for the bobbin to refill. The kitchen became a factory. Fabric piled on every surface. Thread spools rolled across the floor like marbles. Little Dante would sit at the table doing his homework with a pencil nub, his papers surrounded by half-finished hems, the sound of the sewing machine so constant that years later in college, he could not study in silence. He needed noise. He needed the hum. But here is the thing that Dante never knew, the thing Elias and Martha never told him, the thing they carried between them like a stone in a shared pocket. They were drowning. The magnet school cost $400 a semester. The plant paid $7.25 an hour. The farm barely broke even on a good year and lost money on a bad one. The property taxes went up every year because the county kept reassessing the land. And every year, Elias would drive to the county office and sit in the plastic chair and wait for his number to be called and argue with a clerk who looked at him like he was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. By the time Dante was 12, Elias and Martha had taken out 3 loans, 2 from the credit union in Valdosta and 1 from a man named Curtis Briggs, who ran a lending service out of the back of his barber shop. The kind of loan that did not come with paperwork, but did come with a very clear understanding of what would happen if you missed a payment. They paid it all, every cent, on time. They ate rice and beans 4 nights a week. They turned off the hot water heater between showers. Martha stopped buying fabric softener because it was $1.69 she could put toward Dante's books. Elias's boots developed a hole in the right sole, and he stuffed it with a piece of cardboard from a cereal box and kept walking. Dante never knew. He wore clean clothes. He had his books. He had a lunch packed with care every morning, a peanut butter sandwich cut diagonal the way he liked it, an apple, and a thermos of sweet tea. He thought they were fine. He thought this was just how life was. In 1997, when Dante was 14, Martha sold 3 dozen hand-sewn quilts at the church bazaar and used every penny to buy him a second-hand compact Presario computer from a pawn shop in Moultrie. The hard drive hummed like a tractor engine, and the monitor had a green tint in the upper left corner. But when Dante plugged it in and the screen glowed to life, he looked at his mother with an expression that Martha would carry in her chest for the rest of her living days. He looked at her like she had handed him the world. And in a way, she had. Because that computer became the seed. Dante taught himself to code on that machine. He built websites for the church, for the auto repair shop on Madison Highway, for anyone who would let him practice. By the time he was 16, he was making $200 a month building websites for small businesses across South Georgia. And he told his father one evening on the porch that he was going to build something so big it would put Valdosta on the map. Elias looked at him and nodded. "Just remember where the map starts, son," he said. Dante heard the words. He did not understand them. Not then. It would take 20 years and a mop bucket for them to land. When Dante got the scholarship to Georgia Tech in 2001, Martha pressed his only suit and Elias drove him to Atlanta in the pickup truck that burned oil so bad the highway behind them looked like a smoke signal. They pulled up to the dormitory and Elias helped carry the 2 duffel bags up 3 flights of stairs Because the elevator was broken. He set the bags on the narrow bed and looked around the cinder block room and said, "This'll do just fine." Then he hugged his son. Hard. The kind of hug that compresses your ribs and smells like motor oil and earth and something else. Something you cannot name until you are much older and realize it was fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of what the city would do to the boy he raised. Fear that this hug might be the last one that mattered. Martha cried in the truck on the way home. Elias drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set like concrete and did not say a word for 170 miles. Atlanta swallowed Dante Whitfield like a whale swallows a minnow. Whole, fast, without apology. He thrived at Georgia Tech in a way that surprised no one who knew him and everyone who did not. He double majored in computer science and business, graduated summa cum laude, and by his senior year had already co-founded a fintech startup out of a shared apartment on Ponce de Leon Avenue with a classmate named Victor Hale. Victor was everything Dante was not. Smooth where Dante was intense, polished where Dante was raw. Victor came from money, old Buckhead money, the kind of family that had a summer house and used summer as a verb. He wore sport coats to class. He called professors by their first names. He knew which fork to use at a dinner with investors, and more importantly, he knew which investors to have dinner with. Dante built the product. Victor built the relationships. It was a partnership that worked the way fire works with gasoline, violently, effectively, and with no regard for what got burned. Within 3 years, Whitfield Capital was processing transactions for regional banks across the Southeast. Within 5 years, they had expanded to 14 states. Within 8 years, the company went public and Dante Whitfield, the boy from Valdosta who had learned to code on a pawnshop computer, was worth $47 million on paper. He bought the penthouse in Buckhead. He bought the cars. He married Simone Tate, a corporate attorney he met at a fundraiser, a woman of extraordinary beauty and lethal ambition who understood the value of a last name that was about to be on the side of a building. And somewhere in the climb, somewhere between the Series B funding and the IPO, somewhere between the magazine covers and the private flights, Dante stopped calling home. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It happened the way a river changes course, so gradually that you do not notice until you look up and realize the water is running in an entirely different direction. First, the weekly calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then only on holidays, and even those were rushed. Distracted conversations where Dante would be checking his email while Martha told him about the new hymnals at church. And Elias stood in the background, pretending he did not want to talk, when the truth was he wanted to talk so badly his chest hurt. Martha would say, "Your daddy wants to say hello." And Elias would take the phone and hold it like it was made of glass and say, "Hey son, you doing all right?" And Dante would say, "Yeah, Dad, doing great. Real busy though, I'll call you back." And Elias would say, "All right then," and hand the phone back to Martha and walk out to the porch and sit there until the sun went down. The distance was not just geographical, it was atmospheric. Dante had entered a world where his parents did not exist, not because he denied them, but because no one in his new life asked about them. Victor never mentioned family. Simone's parents were both attorneys who lived in a gated community in Sandy Springs and discussed mergers at Thanksgiving dinner. The investors, the board members, the clients, they all existed in a sealed ecosystem where the concept of a father who worked a chicken processing plant and a mother who sewed quilts was not shameful, it was simply inconceivable. It did not fit the narrative. So Dante, without ever making a conscious decision, simply stopped including it. He told himself they were fine. He sent money, a check every month, automatic transfer, $3,000 into the account at the credit union in Valdosta. It was more money than Elias and Martha had ever seen, and it was also the loneliest money in the world because it arrived without a phone call, without a letter, without the sound of his voice. Martha cashed the checks. She bought Elias a new pair of boots and a recliner for the living room. She got the roof fixed. She put the rest in savings. She never told Dante, but she kept every deposit slip in a shoebox under the bed, arranged by date, and sometimes at night she would take the box out and hold the slips, and it was the closest she could get to holding her son. Now here is where the story cracks open, and the light that comes in is the color of blood. In the spring of 2018, Dante's company had grown to 500 employees and was headquartered in a glass tower on Peachtree Street that cost more to maintain in a month than the Whitfield farm had earned in its entire existence. The company was publicly traded, aggressively expanding and leaking money from a wound that Dante could not see because someone had put a bandage over it and told him everything was fine. That someone was Victor Hale. Victor had been skimming, not the clumsy kind of skimming that shows up on an audit. The elegant kind. The kind that requires an understanding of shell companies, offshore holding accounts, and the precise amount you can move without triggering the flags. He had been doing it for 4 years, siphoning funds into a web of entities registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, and by the time the spring of 2018 rolled around, he had extracted just over $12 million from Whitfield Capital. But skimming was only half of the sin. The other half involved Simone, Dante's wife, the woman who wore his ring and slept in his bed and smiled for the cameras at charity galas, had discovered Victor's scheme not by accident, but by design. She had been reviewing the quarterly reports for a client of her own law firm and noticed a pattern in the disbursements. She followed the thread. She found the shell companies. She had everything she needed to blow the whistle and save her husband's company and his reputation. She did not blow the whistle. She picked up the phone and called Victor. "I know what you're doing," she said. "Then you know what happens if it comes out," Victor replied. What happened next was not an affair, though that came later. What happened next was a negotiation. Simone wanted security, not Dante's security, which was tied to a company that might or might not survive the next market correction. She wanted her own, independent, untouchable. Victor offered her a cut, 10% of everything he had moved, paid into an account that Dante would never know about, in exchange for her silence and her cooperation. Cooperation meant something specific. It meant managing Dante, keeping him focused on the product, on the growth, on the vision, while Victor managed the money. It meant keeping Dante away from the people who might tell him the truth. And that, most critically, meant keeping Dante away from his parents. Because Elias Whitfield, for all his dirt road simplicity, for all his calloused hands and his 7th grade education, had a nose for liars that was sharper than any forensic audit. Martha, too. Simone knew this. She had met them once, at the wedding, and she had watched the way Elias looked at Victor during the toast, a long, still, measuring look, the look of a man who has spent his life reading the weather and knows when a storm is lying about its direction. If Elias and Martha came to Atlanta, if they spent any real time around Victor, the whole thing would unravel. So Simone became the gatekeeper. "Your parents called," she would tell Dante at dinner. "I told them we're traveling. They said they're fine. Your mom sounded great." "Did my dad say anything?" Dante would ask. "You know your dad. He just said to tell you he's proud of you." Elias never said that. Elias never called. The number Simone gave them went to a voicemail that was never checked. The emails bounced. The letters, the actual handwritten letters that Martha sent every 2 weeks in envelopes addressed in her careful schoolteacher cursive, were intercepted by Simone's assistant and filed in a drawer that nobody opened. To Dante, his parents were fine, happy, living their quiet life in Valdosta. He even told people this at dinner parties with a smile that was genuine because he believed it. "My folks are still down in Georgia," he would say, "living the good life. I keep trying to get them to come up here, but they love that little town." He did not know that by the fall of 2019, the $3,000 monthly transfers had stopped. He did not know because Victor had rerouted them. The money still left Dante's account, but it no longer arrived at the credit union in Valdosta. It went to one of Victor's shells, a line item labeled Family Trust Management, that no one questioned because no one knew to question it. He did not know that Martha had been diagnosed with early-onset arthritis, so severe she could no longer operate the sewing machine, that the machine sat silent for the first time in 30 years, and the silence in that kitchen was louder than any sound the house had ever known. He did not know that the property taxes had gone up again, that this time there was no money to fight it, and that the county had filed a lien on the farm. He did not know that Elias, 62 years old, with a bad knee and a worse back, had driven to Atlanta in the same pickup truck that still burned oil, and had stood in the lobby of Whitfield Capital headquarters and asked to see his son, and had been told by a receptionist with a Bluetooth headset and a pitying smile that Mr. Whitfield was unavailable and would he like to leave a message. Elias left a message. He wrote it on the back of a deposit slip from the credit union, the last one Martha had saved. He wrote, "Son, need to talk. Important. Love, Daddy." The message was placed on Simone's desk. Simone put it through the shredder, and Elias drove home. 170 miles of silence, just like the first time. But this time, Martha was not in the passenger seat. She was home, in the recliner Dante's money had bought, with her swollen hands folded in her lap, waiting. "What did he say?" Martha asked. Elias hung his hat on the hook by the door. "He's busy, baby. He's real busy." Martha nodded. She did not cry. She had used up her crying years ago. But something behind her eyes went dark, like a pilot light that finally gives out after burning too long on too little gas. 2 months later, the county took the farm. The job listing said, Janitorial Associate, Whitfield Capital, 3rd shift, $8.50 an hour. No experience required. Elias read it on a computer at the Valdosta Public Library. He had driven there because the farm was gone and the house was gone, and he and Martha were living in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat on Hill Avenue that smelled of dryer sheets and mildew. Martha's sister had taken her in temporarily, but Elias would not go. He said he needed to be closer to work. He did not say which work. He did not say he had applied for a job cleaning the floors of his own son's building. The hiring manager never made the connection. Whitfield is not an uncommon name, and the application only asked for a first name and last initial on the badge. Elias W. Janitorial Services. He passed the background check. He passed the drug test. He was given a gray uniform, a bucket, a mop, and a set of keys to the supply closet on the 42nd floor. His first night, he stood in the lobby at 11 p.m. after the last employees had gone home. The marble floor stretched before him like a frozen lake. The ceiling rose 4 stories above, held up by steel beams that caught the security lights and gleamed like the ribs of some enormous animal. On the far wall, in brushed chrome letters, each 3 feet tall, was the name Whitfield Capital. Elias looked at those letters for a long time. Then he filled his bucket, wrung his mop, and got to work. He cleaned that building the way he had worked the farm, thoroughly, quietly, without complaint. He mopped the lobby. He vacuumed the executive suites. He scrubbed the bathrooms on all 44 floors. He emptied trash cans that contained single-use espresso pods and takeout containers from restaurants where a salad cost more than his daily wage. He polished the glass conference table on the 43rd floor where his son held board meetings, and he could see his own reflection in the surface, distorted and dark, like looking at yourself through deep water. The other janitors liked him. There were 6 of them on the night shift, mostly older men, mostly black, all with stories of their own that they told in fragments during the 15-minute break at 2 a.m. in the basement break room. Carl had been a mechanic until his shop closed. Dwayne had driven trucks until his back gave out. Rosa, the one woman on the crew, had been a teacher's aide for 23 years until the school district cut her position and her pension in the same meeting. They called Elias Pop because he was the oldest and because he had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying mattered, even when you were just talking about the weather or the price of gas or the way your granddaughter had smiled at you last Sunday. Elias did not tell them who he was. He did not tell them that the name on the building was his name, that the man in the corner office was his boy, that the money flowing through this glass tower had its source in a sewing machine in Valdosta and a pawnshop computer and a mother's hands that could no longer close around a needle. He just cleaned, and he watched. Every morning at 7:15, Dante Whitfield walked through the lobby. Elias would be finishing the overnight shift, making his last pass with the mop, the bucket wheel squeaking on the marble. Dante would come through the revolving door with his phone pressed to his ear, his coat draped over one arm, his stride long and purposeful, and he would walk within 6 feet of his father without seeing him. 6 feet, close enough to smell the floor cleaner, close enough to hear the bucket wheel squeak, close enough that if Elias had reached out his hand, he could have touched his son's sleeve, but Dante's eyes were always on the phone. Always on the screen, always somewhere else. This happened every morning for 7 months. 7 months of Elias watching his son walk past him like he was furniture. 7 months of pressing his lips together and gripping the mop handle until his knuckles turned ash gray and reminding himself why he was here. Not for the $8.50 an hour. Not for the dignity of work, though there was that. He was here because something was wrong with his company, and he could feel it the way you feel a change in the barometric pressure before a storm, deep in the joints, deep in the bones, in the places where the body knows things the mind refuses to accept. He had felt it that day in the lobby when the receptionist had turned him away. Something in the air, something slick and wrong, like oil on water. And now, mopping floors at midnight, emptying trash at 2 a.m., polishing glass at 4, he was starting to see it. It started with the trash. Executives are careless with their garbage because they assume no one who reads it matters. Elias found shredded documents in the bin outside Victor Hale's office. Most were confetti, unreadable. But some had been shredded carelessly, in strips rather than cross-cut, and if you laid them on a table in the break room and matched the edges like a jigsaw puzzle, you could read fragments. Transfer, Cayman National, authorization FI, Hale, disbursement account, ending 4471. Elias did not understand finance. He had a 7th grade education, and he could not tell you the difference between a hedge fund and a fence post. But he understood lying. He understood when numbers did not add up. He understood the look on a man's face when he is stealing, because he had seen it before in the eyes of Curtis Briggs at the barber shop in Valdosta, the way a thief smiles like he is doing you a favor. So Elias started collecting, not stealing, collecting. He kept the shredded strips in a Ziploc bag in his locker. He wrote down dates and times in a composition notebook he bought at the Dollar Tree. He noted which offices stayed lit past midnight, which executives took phone calls in the stairwell where they thought no one could hear, which printers ran at 3 a.m. spitting out documents that were gone by morning. And he listened, because that was the other thing about being invisible. People talk in front of you like you are not there. They stand in the hallway outside the conference room while the cleaning man pushes his cart past, and they say things they would never say if they thought the cleaning man had heirs. The Meridian numbers are padded. Victor signed off on it. Simone knows. She's been in on it since the restructure. If Dante finds out, the stock tanks. We all lose. Elias heard it all. The mop moved. The bucket squeaked. The invisible man absorbed everything. He did not go to the police. He did not call a lawyer. He did not confront his son. Because Elias Whitfield understood something about loyalty that most people learn from books, but he learned from the mud. You do not save a man by humiliating him. You do not protect your son by destroying his world. You wait, you gather, you prepare, and when the moment comes, You walk into the room with everything you have, and you lay it on the table, and you let the truth do what the truth does. He was waiting for the right moment. He did not know it was coming so soon. The morning didn't just break, it shattered. Dante walked into his office on a Tuesday in November and found his world rearranging itself without his permission. His assistant, a meticulous woman named Grace, who had been with him since the company had 7 employees, was standing outside his door with an expression he had never seen on her face. It was the expression of someone holding a grenade and trying to decide whether to hand it to you or throw it. The board called an emergency meeting. Grace said, 9 a.m., conference room A. About what? They didn't say, but Mr. Hale requested it. Something cold settled in the base of Dante's spine. Victor never requested board meetings. Victor avoided board meetings the way cats avoid water. He sent representatives. He sent reports. He sent his second-in-command, a man named Derek Solis, who had the charisma of a spreadsheet and the loyalty of a paid contractor. For Victor to request an emergency session meant something had shifted in the architecture of the company, and not in Dante's favor. He sat down at his desk. The Atlanta skyline spread before him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in years, it did not look like a kingdom. It looked like a chessboard, and he was starting to suspect he was not the one moving the pieces. Dante pulled up the financials. He had not looked at the raw numbers in months. That was Victor's domain. Victor handled the money. Dante handled the vision. That was the deal. That had always been the deal, but now, scrolling through the quarterly report, something snagged his attention like a fishhook catching flesh. The family trust management line item, $3,000 a month, his parents' money. He followed it to the disbursement ledger, and the account number was wrong. It did not match the credit union in Valdosta. It matched nothing he recognized. He called the credit union. A woman with a honeysuckle accent told him the account had received no deposits in 14 months. 14 months. His hands went numb. The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He stared at the number on the screen, and the number stared back at him with the blank indifference of a fact that does not care whether you are ready to receive it. He called his mother's phone. The number was disconnected. He called the house in Valdosta. A recording told him the number was no longer in service. He called Simone. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice wrapped in the practiced calm of a woman who has rehearsed for this call. Hey babe, what's up? Where are my parents? A pause. One beat too long. What do you mean? They're in Valdosta. I talked to your mom last week. Her phone is disconnected. The house number is dead, and the money I send them hasn't been arriving for over a year. Where are my parents, Simone? Another pause. This one longer. Long enough for Dante to hear the sound of his own blood in his ears, a dull roar like the ocean heard through a wall. Dante, calm down. I'm sure there's an explanation. Then explain it. I'll look into it. You have the board meeting in 20 minutes. Focus on that. She hung up. And in the silence that followed, Dante felt something he had not felt since he was 14 years old. Standing in the kitchen in Valdosta, watching his father's face in the yellow light. He felt afraid, not the corporate fear of a bad quarter or a failed deal. The old fear, the bone-deep childhood fear of losing the people who made you. He stood up from his desk. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby. He did not know what he was looking for. He did not have a plan. He just knew he needed to move, the way an animal knows it needs to run before the conscious mind registers the predator. He rode the elevator down 43 floors and stepped out into the marble lobby, and the first thing he saw was the mop bucket. Yellow, cracked wheel. Sitting in the middle of the floor like it had been placed there by God as a stage direction. And next to it, on one knee, wringing the mop, was his father. This time, Dante did not almost walk past. This time, he stopped. His Italian loafers squeaked on the wet marble. His $500 cologne mixed with the pine sol, and the name on the badge burned into him like a brand. Elias, Janitorial Services. Daddy. Hey, son. And for a long, terrible, holy moment, the lobby of Whitfield Capital was as quiet as a church. The security guard at the front desk looked away. The receptionist stopped typing. Even the elevators seemed to hold their doors, as if the building itself understood that something sacred was happening in its belly. Dante dropped to his knees on the wet floor. His slacks soaked through. He did not care. He grabbed his father's hands, those hands, the scarred, thick-knuckled, farm-broken hands, and he held them against his forehead, and he wept. He wept the way a man weeps when the dam breaks, and everything he has been holding back for 20 years comes rushing out in a flood that has no bottom and no end. He wept for the phone calls he did not make, for the letters he did not write, for the money that disappeared, for the farm that was gone, for his mother's hands that could not sew anymore, for the look on his father's face that held no accusation, only love, only that deep, unreasonable, unearnable love that he did not deserve and could not repay and would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of. Elias put his hand on the back of his son's head, the same hand that had held him above the baptism font, the same hand that had gripped the broken fence post in the rain. He put that hand on his son's head and said the only thing that mattered. "I'm here, boy. I've been here." 7 months. He had been 6 feet away for 7 months, and then Elias did something that changed everything. He reached into the pocket of his gray uniform, the uniform that was 2 sizes too big, and he pulled out a composition notebook. Dollar Tree. 99 cents. The cover was warped from being pressed against his body during work, and the pages were filled with dates, times, names, account numbers, fragments of shredded documents pressed flat with tape, and notes written in Elias's careful, blocky handwriting, the handwriting of a man who left school after 7th grade but never stopped paying attention. "Son," Elias said, and his voice was steady as bedrock. "I came here to find you, but I found something else first. You've got snakes in your garden, and I've been cataloging every one of them." He placed the notebook in Dante's hands. Dante opened it, and the pages fell to a spread dated 3 months ago, a recreation of a shredded document from Victor Hale's office, pieced together strip by strip, showing a wire transfer of $800,000 to an account in Grand Cayman. Dante looked up at his father. "How long have you known?" "Since my 2nd month. The trash talk, son. People throw away the truth every night. They just figure nobody's reading it." "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Elias looked at his son with those eyes, those steady, storm-weathered, unbowed eyes. "Because you weren't ready. You were still looking at your phone." Downstairs, in the basement break room, the night shift had already heard. Not the details. Not the names, but the rumor traveled the way rumors travel in buildings where the people who clean know more than the people who decide. Through glances, through whispers over coffee in styrofoam cups, through the particular electricity that fills a space when something true is about to break the surface. Carl was the first to speak. He was sitting in the plastic chair by the vending machine, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Pop," he said. "That's your boy up there, isn't it?" It was not a question. Carl had known for 3 months. He had seen the resemblance the first week, the jawline, the way Elias held his shoulders when he was thinking, the same way the man in the corner office held his when he stood at the window looking out over the city. Carl had never said anything because Carl understood that some truths are not yours to speak. You hold them the way you hold a candle in a wind, cupped and careful, until the person who owns the flame is ready to let it burn in the open. Elias sat down heavily. His knee throbbed. The fluorescent light above the break table buzzed with the particular frequency of a bulb that was about to die, and in its flickering light, Elias looked every one of his 63 years. "Yeah," he said, That's my boy." Rosa set down her crossword puzzle. Dwayne leaned forward. The room, which normally held the comfortable noise of people killing time between shifts, went silent the way a room goes silent when someone is about to tell the truth. "He didn't know you were here?" Dwayne asked. "He didn't know I was alive," Elias said. And the sentence came out flat and matter-of-fact, like a weather report, but the weight of it pressed the air out of the room. Carl shook his head. Slowly. The kind of slow that means a man is processing something that offends him at a level deeper than language. 7 months, he said. 7 months you've been mopping that man's floor. 6 feet, Rosa said quietly. You told me once. 6 feet between you, every morning. Elias nodded. Why? Dwayne asked. Why didn't you just grab him, shake him, make him see you? Elias looked at his hands. Those hands. He turned them over, palms up, and studied the lines as if the answer was written there in the geography of scar tissue and callus. Because that's not how you save somebody, he said. You don't save a man by forcing him to look at what he's been ignoring. He has to trip over it himself. He has to feel the floor shift under his feet and lose his balance and reach for something solid and realize the only solid thing in the room is the thing he's been stepping over. He paused. The fluorescent bulb buzzed. My boy built something real. Something that started in a kitchen in Valdosta with his mama's sewing money and his own 2 hands. But somewhere along the line, people got in his ear. People who wore suits that cost more than my truck. People who shook his hand and smiled and stole from him with the other hand. And they did it because they knew he wasn't looking. Because he was too busy looking up to look around. Carl nodded. He knew that story. Every man in that room knew that story. They had all, in one way or another, been the thing that somebody too important stepped over. So I mopped, Elias said. And I watched. And I waited, because a father's job isn't to fix everything. A father's job is to be there when the fixing needs to happen, to have the tools ready, to know where the leak is before the whole ceiling comes down. He looked up from his hands. And now the ceiling's coming down, and my boy needs a plumber. Rosa laughed. It was a short, sharp laugh, the kind that breaks the tension the way a crack breaks ice, and suddenly they were all laughing, the 4 of them, in the basement of a 44-story glass tower at 2:30 in the morning, and the sound of it bounced off the cinder block walls and the linoleum floor, and it was the warmest thing that building had ever held. Meanwhile, 43 floors above, Dante was making a phone call. Not to the lawyers, not to the board, to Simone. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was different now. The practiced calm was gone. In its place was something thinner, sharper, the voice of a woman who has been holding a mask in place for years and can feel it slipping. You went through the books, she said. It was not a question. Where are my parents, Simone? Dante, listen to me. Everything I did to protect the company, to protect us. Us. He repeated the word like it was a foreign syllable that he was tasting for the first time and finding bitter. You told me my parents were on a cruise. You told me my mother was fine. She can't use her hands anymore, Simone. She can't sew. She can't hold a cup without shaking. And my father is downstairs right now in a gray uniform, cleaning the floors of a building with his name on it. Where in any of that is us? The silence on the line was the loudest thing Dante had ever heard. It was louder than the board meetings and the conference calls and the applause at the IPO. It was the silence of a lie that has run out of road. Victor said if your parents came to Atlanta, they'd figure it out, Simone said. Her voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. Your father especially. Victor said one dinner with your father, and the whole thing would unravel. He has this way of looking at people, like he can see through them. He can, Dante said. He always could. I know that now. I knew it then. That's why I agreed to keep them away. You intercepted my mother's letters. Yes. You rerouted the money. Victor rerouted it, I let it happen. You told me they were fine. Yes. They lost the farm, Simone. The farm that's been in my family since before we had the right to own one. They lost it because you and Victor decided my parents were a liability. Dante, I'm sorry. I don't want your sorry. I want my parents' years back. I want my mother's hands back. I want the letters you threw away. Can you give me those? She could not. She knew it. He knew it. And the knowing sat between them on the phone line like a stone at the bottom of a river, immovable and cold. I'll be at the board meeting tomorrow, Dante said. And I'm bringing my father. He hung up. He sat in the dark of his office, the Atlanta skyline glittering before him like a promise that had been broken and soldered back together with fool's gold. He thought about the notebook. The Dollar Tree composition notebook. 99 cents. And in its pages, more truth than $12 million of stolen money could buy. He pressed his forehead against the glass. The glass was cold. The city was warm. And somewhere far below, in a basement break room, his father was finishing his coffee and standing up and telling Carl and Dwayne and Rosa that it was time to get back to work because the floors were not going to clean themselves. 9 a.m. Conference Room A, the 43rd floor. The room was all glass and chrome, designed by an architect who believed that transparency was a design principle and not an ethical one. The conference table could seat 24. 12 board members were already seated when Dante walked in. Victor Hale sat at the far end, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who has already won. Derek Solis was there, distributing packets. Simone was there, seated behind Dante's usual chair like a shadow. The company's outside counsel, a white-haired attorney named Berkowitz, who billed $800 an hour and earned every cent, sat with his hands folded and his expression carefully blank. Victor spoke first. Dante, thanks for joining. We have some concerns about the Meridian account projections, and the board felt it was time for a conversation about leadership structure going forward. Translation, we are taking your company. Dante understood it immediately. This was a coup. Dressed in corporate language, wrapped in the silk of fiduciary responsibility, but a coup nonetheless. Victor had the votes. He had spent months cultivating the independent board members, taking them to dinners, making promises, leveraging the very money he had stolen to buy the loyalty he needed to steal more. The meeting was theater. The decision had already been made. Dante looked at Victor. He looked at Simone, who would not meet his eyes. He looked at the board members, some of whom had the decency to look uncomfortable and some of whom did not. Before we proceed, Dante said, I'd like to bring in one more person. Victor frowned. This isn't an open session, Dante. He's an employee. He has information relevant to the agenda. Dante walked to the conference room door and opened it. The hallway smelled of floor cleaner. Standing outside, in his gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big, holding his mop in one hand and the Dollar Tree composition notebook in the other, was Elias Whitfield. The room went still. Elias walked in. His work boots left damp prints on the carpet. The mop handle knocked against the doorframe, and he adjusted it with the casual competence of a man who has navigated tight spaces his whole life. He did not look at the table. He did not look at the chrome or the glass or the skyline or the leather chairs that cost more than his monthly rent. He looked at Victor Hale. And Victor Hale, for the first time in 20 years of partnership, looked afraid. This is Elias Whitfield, Dante said. He is my father. He has been working as a janitor in this building for the past 7 months, and he has something to show you. Elias set the mop against the wall. He placed the notebook on the conference table. He opened it to the first page and began to speak. He spoke for 45 minutes. His voice never rose. His hands never shook. He walked the board through 7 months of documentation, shredded transfer records, overhead conversations logged with dates and times, account numbers cross-referenced with public filings. a pattern of disbursements that traced a river of stolen money from Whitfield Capital through 6 shell entities to Victor Hale's personal accounts. He did not use financial jargon. He did not need to. He spoke the way he spoke to the men at the break room table during the 15-minute break at 2 a.m. Plain. Clear. True. He said, "This money went here, and this man said this, and these numbers don't match," and each statement landed like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading across the faces of every person in the room. Victor tried to interrupt twice. The first time, Berkowitz raised his hand without looking up from the notebook. The second time, Dante said, "Let him finish." And the way he said it, quiet and hard, the way Elias used to say, "Come inside," when a storm was coming, left no room for objection. When Elias was done, he closed the notebook and looked at his son. Not at the board, not at the lawyers, at his son. And he said, "That's all I got. I hope it's enough." It was more than enough. Berkowitz took the notebook. He made 3 phone calls before the board members had finished their coffee. By noon, a forensic accounting firm was on site. By 5 p.m., Victor Hale had been escorted from the building by security, his access badges deactivated, his office sealed. By the following Monday, the SEC had opened an investigation. By the following month, Victor Hale and Derek Solis were indicted on 14 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. Simone was not indicted. She cooperated. She gave the prosecutors everything they needed. Every email, every account, every recorded phone call she had saved as insurance against the day Victor decided she was a liability. She cooperated because she was smart enough to know the ship was sinking and ruthless enough to make sure she was not on it when it went down. Dante signed the divorce papers on a Thursday. He sat in Berkowitz's office and read each page, and when he came to the line that dissolved the marriage, he thought about the diamond ring and the magazine photographs and the charity galas, and he felt nothing. Not anger, not grief. Just the vast, echoing emptiness of realizing that the person you shared your bed with was a stranger who had been cashing checks on your blindness. He signed his name. He put down the pen, and he drove to Valdosta. The pickup truck was still there. It was parked behind the laundromat on Hill Avenue, the one that burned oil, the one that had carried Dante to Georgia Tech and Elias to Atlanta and back again, 170 miles of silence each way. The paint had faded from blue to a color that was not quite gray and not quite anything else. The right taillight was held on with duct tape, but when Elias turned the key, the engine caught on the first try, and it rumbled with the deep, stubborn persistence of something that refuses to quit. Dante followed his father to the apartment. 2 rooms above the laundromat, a kitchenette with a hot plate, a bathroom with a shower stall so small you had to back in, and Martha, sitting in a chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, the swollen knuckles catching the late afternoon light. She looked at her son standing in the doorway, and she did not say, "Where have you been?" or "How could you?" or any of the 1,000 accusations she had earned the right to speak. She said, "Baby, you're so thin. Have you been eating?" Dante crossed the room and knelt beside her chair and put his head in her lap, the way he had done when he was 5, and the world was small and safe, and his mother's hands could fix anything. Martha put her swollen fingers on his head and stroked his hair and hummed. The hymn her mother had hummed, the one without a name, the one that lived in the walls of every kitchen the women of that family had ever worked in. They sat like that for a long time. Elias stood in the doorway and watched and said nothing, because some moments belong to a mother and her son, and a father's job is to stand guard at the door and make sure the world stays outside. That night, Dante slept on the floor of the apartment on a pallet of blankets that Martha made up with the same precision she had once used on the quilts. The floor was hard. The laundromat below hummed and thumped. Through the thin walls, he could hear someone's television playing a late-night show, and he slept better than he had slept in years because for the first time in a long time, he knew exactly where he was and exactly who he was sleeping near. In the morning, he made calls. Not to the office, not to the lawyers. He called the county assessor's office in Lowndes County and asked about the farm. The land had been seized, sold at auction, and purchased by a development company that planned to subdivide it into half-acre lots for a new subdivision. The deal had not closed yet. There was a 60-day review period. Dante bought the land back. He paid 3 times what his grandmother had originally held it for, and he did not blink. He paid off every debt, the credit union loans, the lien, the back taxes. He called Curtis Briggs' son because Curtis had died in 2015, and he paid off the barbershop loan plus 20 years of interest that had never been formally calculated, but that Dante calculated himself, because a debt is a debt whether it is written down or not. He did not buy his parents a mansion. He did not move them to Atlanta. He knew better now. Instead, he hired a contractor from Hahira, a man named Terence Walker, whose father had gone to school with Elias, and he had the farmhouse rebuilt. Not replaced. Rebuilt. Same footprint. Same porch. Same kitchen where Martha's sewing machine had run like a heartbeat for 30 years. New roof, new plumbing, new wiring, but the bones of the house were the original bones because some things should not be replaced. Some things should be restored. The sewing machine went back in the kitchen. Martha could not operate it anymore. Her hands would not allow it, but she wanted it there, in its spot, where she could see it when she sat at the table. Dante understood. Some objects are not tools, they are witnesses. They were there for the sacrifice, and they earned their place on the altar. Elias went back to the farm. He could not work it the way he once had. The knee was too far gone. The back would not bend the way it needed to. But he could sit on the porch in the evening and watch the fireflies come up from the fields, and he could feel the red clay beneath his boots. And when the rain came down in sheets the way it had in '91, he could stand in it if he wanted to. Hatless, water streaming down his face, and remember what it felt like to be young and afraid and strong enough to hold a broken fence post in a storm. Dante restructured Whitfield Capital. He brought in a new CFO, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had the warmth of a glacier and the integrity of a bank vault. He reduced his own salary. He established an employee profit-sharing program. He created a fund for the children of janitorial and maintenance staff to attend college, and he named it the Martha Whitfield Scholarship. And when he announced it at the company meeting, the janitors who worked the night shift, Carl and Dwayne and Rosa, and the others who had called his father Pop, stood in the back of the room and clapped until their hands were raw. He drove to Valdosta every other weekend. He sat on the porch with his father, and they talked, sometimes for hours, sometimes not at all, because they were learning that silence between a father and son does not have to mean distance. It can mean peace. It can mean trust. It can mean, I am here and I am not going anywhere, and you do not have to fill the air with words to prove it. One evening, 6 months after the board meeting, Dante and Elias sat on the porch as the sun went down and the sky turned the color of a bruise, purple and gold, and that shade of orange that only exists in the South, the color of sweet tea held up to the light. Dad, Dante said. Why didn't you tell me when you got to Atlanta, when you got the job? Why didn't you just come to my office and tell me everything? Elias was quiet for a while. A mockingbird sang somewhere in the dark. The porch creaked under the weight of 2 men and a lifetime of unsaid things. Because you needed to see me first, Elias said. Not the janitor, not the badge. Me. You needed to look down at that floor and see your father and feel what you felt without me explaining it away. The truth isn't something you tell a man, Dante. It's something he walks into. Dante thought about that. He thought about the lobby, the mop bucket, the cologne and the floor cleaner, the name on the badge. He thought about 7 months of walking past his father without seeing him, and the 6 feet between them that had been wider than any ocean. I walked past you, Dante said. Every day. I know. I was on my phone. I know. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Elias reached over and put his hand on Dante's shoulder. That hand, scarred, calloused, unbreakable. A hand that had held a fence post and a baptism font and a mop and a 99-cent notebook and, through all of it, never let go. You're here now, Elias said. That's what counts. The mockingbird sang. The porch creaked. The red clay beneath the house held firm, the way it had for 100 years, the way it would for 100 more. Martha Whitfield passed on a Sunday morning in the spring of 2021. She went the way she lived, quietly, with dignity, in her own home, in the kitchen where the sewing machine still sat, with Elias holding one hand and Dante holding the other. The funeral was at Mount Olive Baptist. The third pew was reserved for family. Elias sat on the left. Dante sat on the right. Between them, on the wooden seat polished by 100 years of Sunday clothes, was a folded quilt, one of the 36 that Martha had sold at the church bazaar in '97 to buy a second-hand computer. This one had come back. A woman from the congregation had brought it to Elias the day Martha died and said she would want this to come home. The choir sang. Elias sang louder than all of them. His voice was not beautiful. It was cracked and rough, and it wavered on the high notes like a man walking a wire over a canyon. But it was loud. It filled the church the way a river fills a valley, with force and persistence and the absolute refusal to stop. After the service, Dante stood at the grave and looked at the headstone. Martha Grace Whitfield, beloved wife, beloved mother, the hands that held us together. He had written those words himself. He had sat at the kitchen table in Valdosta, the same table where he had done his homework surrounded by fabric and thread, and he had written 17 versions before he found the one that was true. Not clever, not poetic. True. He thought about the sewing machine. He thought about the peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonal. He thought about the deposit slips in the shoebox. He thought about all the ways his mother had said, "I love you," without ever using those words, because love in that house was not a phrase. It was a verb. It was the hum of a singer at 3 a.m. It was the sound of a pencil on a paper bag, doing the math, making the impossible work. Dante drove back to Atlanta that night. He went to the office. Not to the executive floor, to the janitorial supply closet on the 42nd floor. He opened the door and stood in the small room with its shelves of cleaning products and stacked paper towels and the faint smell of ammonia that would never leave. And he thought about his father, standing in this room, putting on the gray uniform, picking up the mop, walking out into the marble lobby to clean the floors of an empire that bore his name. He closed the door. He went home. He sat on the floor of his empty apartment, the one he had rented after the divorce, and he opened his laptop and began to write. He wrote the story. All of it. The farm, the rain, the sewing machine, the chicken processing plant, the computer from the pawn shop, the drive to Atlanta, the scholarship, the company, the betrayal, the mop bucket, the notebook, the board meeting, the return, the red clay. He wrote it not because he wanted sympathy or admiration or even forgiveness. He wrote it because the story did not belong to him. It belonged to every son who had climbed so high he forgot to look down. It belonged to every father who had worked in the dark so his child could stand in the light. It belonged to every mother whose hands gave out before her love did. It belonged to every person who had ever passed a janitor in a hallway and looked at their phone instead of looking at the human being 6 feet away. He published it, not in a magazine, not on a platform. He read it aloud, sitting in the Valdosta Public Library where Elias had found the job listing, in a room full of people who knew Martha, who knew Elias, who knew the farm and the red clay and the church and the quilts. Elias sat in the back row. He wore his one good suit, the same suit he had worn to Dante's wedding and to Martha's funeral and to every Sunday service at Mount Olive for the past 30 years. The cuffs were frayed. The collar was slightly yellowed. But it was pressed. Martha had pressed it. It was the last suit she ever pressed, and Elias would wear it until the threads gave way, because some things should not be replaced. When Dante finished reading, the room was silent. Then Elias stood up. He did not clap. He did not speak. He walked to the front of the room slowly, his left knee popping, his work boots quiet on the library carpet, and he stood in front of his son, and he looked at him. And Dante looked back, not at a phone, not at a screen, not at a balance sheet or a stock ticker or a contract or a deal, at his father, at the man, at the scarred hands and the bowed shoulders and the steady eyes that held no accusation. Just love. That deep, unreasonable, unearnable love. Elias put his hand on Dante's face, palm flat against his son's cheek, the way you hold a child's face when you want them to remember something important. And he said, very quietly, so that only Dante could hear, "Remember where the map starts, son." And this time, Dante understood. The map starts here. It starts with the hands that raised you. It starts with the sacrifice you did not see because it was made in the dark. At 3 a.m., at the sewing machine, at the processing plant, in the rain, in the mud, in the silence of a man who drove 170 miles and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the driving itself did not already mean. The map starts with love. And love is not a feeling. It is a decision. It is a mop bucket and a composition notebook and a pair of calloused hands that never stopped reaching for a son who had forgotten how to reach back. Dante Whitfield built an empire, but the foundation was never his. It was poured by a woman at a sewing machine and a man in the rain, and it held because they decided it would hold every single day without recognition, without thanks, without a single round of applause. That is the story. That is the only story that matters. Not the money, not the company, not the betrayal or the redemption or the glass tower on Peachtree Street. The story is a father on his knees with a mop, 6 feet from his son, invisible and patient and relentless in his love. The story is a mother's hands. The story is red clay. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tag a father who sacrificed everything. Tag a mother whose hands told the story her mouth never did. And tell us, what did your parents give up so you could stand where you are today? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one,